There you are. Coming up, a 2-hour collection of haunting true stories from the Appalachian Mountains. Welcome to the dark side of Appalachia.
I was 12 years old the first time I saw her. It was late October, the season when the ridges of northern Georgia wear the fog like an old quilt, and every breath of wind smells of rain and pine. My Papa Coy had promised me that we would take a weekend camping trip near Blood Mountain, the highest point on the Appalachian Trail in the state, a place where the forest was still ancient and endless with mile after mile of thick pine and laurel, so thick that the moonlight itself struggled to find its way through the branches. We set our camp on the edge of a creek that gurgled all night long, and our fire burned bright against the surrounding darkness. I can still see it in my mind's eye, with those sparks twisting upward, vanishing into the trees as if they were swallowed by the sky. Papa Coy had cooked beans in a cast iron pot that night and poured us both a tin cup of hot coffee before he launched into a master class of old-time storytelling. As I sat, eager-eyed, just like a sponge soaking it up, I loved to listen to his stories as he talked about the Confederate deserters who had vanished in these very woods and were never seen again, and then about the panthers that he called painters that roamed the hills under the cover of darkness and screamed like the soul of a scorned woman. But then his voice lowered into a serious tone, and that's when he first mentioned the Lantern Lady. "Some say she's looking for someone," he said, poking the fire with his stick. "But others, they say she's just wandering around, trying to find her way home. But either way, if you ever see that light out here, JD, you best keep your eyes on the ground and mind your business, boy." I laughed, pretending I wasn't scared, but Papa's eyes stayed fixed on me and the dark beyond the firelight, and I tell you, that made me uneasy. Well, finally I crawled into my sleeping bag as the forest died down, almost like it was whispering, soft as breath through dry leaves. And I remembered thinking to myself that I had never quite heard a silence like that before. Well, anyhow, sometime after midnight, something pulled me from my deep sleep. And now I was wide awake. The fire had gone out hours ago, and now there were just a few smoldering coals. It was eerily calm. Even the creek had gone quiet, as if the whole mountain was holding its breath. And just then, I saw something in the woods. It seemed like a faint glow beyond the trees. It wasn't the yellow of a campfire, no, and it wasn't the flash of a flashlight. It was something much colder, white as a star caught in the fog. And then it moved, slowly, side to side. It seemed like someone was walking with a lantern, quietly. I slipped out of my tent. I was barefoot and shivering, but I had to get a better look. As Papa Coy laid sound asleep, I followed that glow until finally I could make it out of shape, and there it was. A tall woman in a long dress that was brushing the ground, with her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She moved in silence, and the light from her lantern shimmered off the mist like ripples on water. I remember how she turned her head, almost as if she was searching for something, and that light slid across her face, so pale and hollow, even from a distance. It seemed like she was whispering, but the sound was all wrong. You see, it wasn't carried by the air. Instead, somehow, it was inside my head, like a paralyzing dream that I couldn't wake up from. Just then, she stopped and slowly lifted her lantern until her eyes found mine. They weren't angry, not even sad, but they were endless and bottomless, just like the color of deep water. Suddenly, something grabbed my shoulder from behind. "Papa, Coy, man, you scared the wits out of me." But he quickly pulled me back into the tent and whispered, "Don't look again, boy, because some lights out here ain't meant to lead you home." For all the rest of that night, sleep was nowhere to be found. And when morning came, I tried to convince myself that I'd just dreamed it all. But down by the creek, half buried in mud, I found a piece of tarnished brass. I picked it up and I studied it. It seemed to be an old lantern handle, and when Papa saw it, he quickly took it from me and tossed it into the current. "Son, it's best not to dig up what's meant to stay buried," he muttered. And just like that, we never spoke of it again. Years passed. I grew up, but I never left those mountains. And I always told myself that memory was nothing more than a trick of firelight and probably just my imagination. But still, there were some nights when the wind rattled my windows just right, and I could still see her drifting through the dark with that pale lantern glow. Finally, when I was about 40 years old, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know if she was real, so I went back. Now, I don't know. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe I just wanted to prove that ghosts don't outlast childhood. So I parked my Chevy pickup down at the same gravel pull-off and hiked down the creek and set up camp on the same spot where we'd pitched our tents all those years before. By dusk, the air had turned cold and was heavy with the scent of rain and fresh pine. The forest felt different, like it somehow was aware of my presence. And that night, I built a small fire and watched the flames dance. And there I sat, with the silence ringing in my ears, and waited. Around midnight, the fog rolled in. Oh, it was so thick that it blurred the edges of my firelight, and the woods grew deadly still. And right on cue, my flashlight sputtered and the batteries died. So there I sat in the dark, with my heart hammering, when suddenly I saw it again, out beyond the trees. The same soft white glow, swaying side to side. My throat went dry. The lantern light moved closer, and through the fog, I caught a glimpse of her. There was that same long dress, the same slow, soundless glide. Only this time, she was much closer than before. So close that the light from her lantern spilled across my boots. And there was her voice again. Not out loud, but inside of my head, just like before. "You shouldn't have come back here." Suddenly, the lantern flared bright with blinding white, and then total darkness. Hours later, I woke to find myself laying on the ground. The fire was cold and dawn was breaking. Everything looked normal. The creek, the trees, the sky, but the ground near my tent was covered in wet footprints that were small and bare. No, I'd seen enough, so I quickly packed up and left without breakfast. Back in town, I asked around about this mysterious lady. Most folks just laughed it off. But one old-timer at the gas station leaned close and said, "My granddaddy saw her once, over near Raven's Cliff. He said she used to be a miner's wife. Her man went down in that cave collapse, and she'd been carrying that lantern through these woods every night, looking for that hole that he never came out of. And after she died, folks just kept seeing that light, same as you." Other folks told it different. Some say that she was drowned in that very creek that we camped beside, chasing her own reflection in the water. Some said she was a lost soul, trapped between worlds, leading the dead back to where they belonged, or dragging the living to keep her company. And every October, hikers on the Appalachian Trail swear that they see her with her white light moving ahead of them, always a few steps beyond reach. One man claimed that the light stopped when he called her name, and I asked what happened then, and he said when she turned around, there was nothing beyond the lantern but air. My God, fella, then what happened? I asked, as the stranger leaned in and his face seemed to completely change. Oh my God, his eyes too were bottomless pits. When finally he spoke, I didn't look again, because some lights out here ain't meant to lead you home.
Don't go anywhere, folks. Coming up, more true stories from the dark side of Appalachia.
When I was a boy, there wasn't a thing I loved more than to walk up that gravel road to my Granny Tollett's place, especially on Halloween, because I knew she was sure to have a story to tell. And sure enough, no sooner than I would open that old screen door and step inside, she would set out into a story that cemented her status as a master storyteller. J.D., now hush, child, and bring that chair closer to the fire so I can get started. Now, where was I? Oh, that's right. Lord of mercy me, if it ain't Halloween. It's nights just like this, with the fog creeping low and the wind rattling the boards, that, honey, I swear the mountains remember things that you and me ain't got no business knowing about. And since you're dead set on hearing about it, I reckon I'll tell you the one story that I never could quite shake. This all happened back in the fall of '58, the same year your Papaw Coy nearly blew the kitchen sky high trying to make his own lighter fluid. Lord, I missed that fool. But anyway, you ones listen close now, because this ain't just any tale for daylight ears. As I recollect, I was living in a little clapboard house just a few hollers away from Chimney Rock. I tell you, that place was as pretty as a postcard and twice as lonely. But back then, I was taking care of your Aunt Mary's young'uns while she worked nights down at Lawson's Diner. Well, on this particular evening, I had to run to the store for flour on count I was fixing to make biscuits to feed the women's ministry down at the church the next morning. So I saddled up Pearl, my old mule. Now Pearl, she was half blind and fully stubborn, but most times she would haul me anywhere I needed to go. Well, anyways, we started down Chimney Rock Road just as the sun slipped behind Walden's Ridge, all the while painting the sky the color of bruised peaches. I can still feel that cold air as it was coming on quick, and it smelt like a river mist and balsam. Now, usually that was my favorite part of the day, but child, not on that evening. That's right, those woods was too quiet. Even the crickets seemed like they were holding their breath. Well, about a mile in, Pearl stopped so sudden that she nearly threw me over her ears. And I said, "What is it now? Do you see something, gal?" Pearl's ears went straight up, stiff as a winter's clothesline, and then she twitched her tail, and then I heard it too. Soft and steady, tap, tap, tap. It sounded like someone was tapping a cane on the ground behind us. Well, now, I ain't one to get nervous. I'd already fought off drunken men, angry raccoons, and 2 Methodist missionaries by that point in my life. But something about that tap didn't feel right. Mostly on count, it wasn't the type of sound a person makes when they're walking. There wasn't nary a shuffle or a breath, just that tapping. "Who's out there?" I hollered. "If you're a ghost, well, that's fine. But if you're a man, I tell you right now, I'm gonna hit you twice. Now show yourself before I lose my religion on you." And just then, everything went still and got eerily quiet. And then the tapping started again. Closer this time. It was circling me and Pearl like a pack of wolves sniffing for weakness. I reached into my saddlebag and I lit up my kerosene lantern. And soon as that flame sparked up, old Pearl started trembling like a sinner at revival. And that's when I saw something moving between the trees. It was tall, too tall, but it was thin as a shadow at noon. And most curious of all, it didn't seem to walk. Instead, it just glided. My lantern light flickered across it, and for just a second, I swear, I saw a long pole dragging behind it, scratching the gravel. Child, my heart started pounding, and I squared my shoulders and I said, "All right now, enough foolishness, you hear me? I ain't afraid of nobody, dead or alive." Suddenly, whatever it was just stopped and slowly turned around and faced me full on. Now, I couldn't see its face. I could only make out this pale, hollow shape with fog moving inside of it, just like a cold breath. About that time, it raised that long stick, just as slow as ice melting, and pointed it straight at me. But that right there was enough for old Pearl. She let out a noise I ain't never heard from a mule in my life. Something between a banshee holler and a rooster trying to sing soprano. And that old gal took off down the road like the devil himself had slapped her. Law, child, it was all I could do to keep from getting throwed off. All the while clinging tight to her neck, hollering, "Lord have mercy, girl, I ain't got the hips for riding like this." Those branches whipped past and they were scratching my arms as Pearl slung gravel from her hooves. But every time I risked to look back, that thing was still there, still gliding and still tapping. It was keeping pace with us without even trying, like it had all the time in the world to haunt me. Within a minute, we tore into a little general store down at the crossroads, and I near fell off a Pearl before I stormed inside yelling, "Mr. Amos, something's following me down that dang road, and I tell you right now, it ain't looking to borrow no sugar." Old Amos went as pale as lard when he set down the can of beans that he was stocking, and he said, "Miss Tollett, don't tell me you went down Chimney Rock Road on Halloween night." "Well, yes, sir, I did, and something's following me with a stick. I swear to you, Amos, it seems like it's marking the ground." Just then, Mr. Amos swallowed hard. "Miss Tollett, don't you know? That thing's been walking the road ever since the war between the states." Child, I just blinked. The Civil War? Yes, ma'am. Most folks say he was a Confederate surveyor who was shot dead while measuring the road in the middle of the night. And that pole, well, it never left his hand. They say he just kept on walking after he died, still measuring and still marking. And I tell you right now, he don't like nobody interfering with his work. And child, you should have saw the look on Mr. Amos as he spoke. That man was scared out of his wits. But not me, child. I just snapped back. Well, ain't that delightful? I just got chased by a dead man with a yardstick. And just then, Amos ducked under the counter and brought out a little pouch. And inside, there was a handful of red salt and 2 pieces of iron. "Miss Tollett, ghosts won't cross iron. You just throw this behind you if he tries to chase you again." So I grabbed that pouch, bought my flour, and went on about my way back towards Miss Mary's. All the while, praying that old Pearl still had a little speed left in her. And back down Chimney Rock Road we went. But child, the fog was thicker now and was creeping across the ground like cold fingers. And Pearl didn't like it at all. Just then, tap, 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 there was that sound again. Oh, I tell you, the air turned colder than a witch's elbow, and my breath fogged up the lantern glass. And just up ahead, between the trees, the tall shape slid forward, and I could see the outline of that pole dragging right alongside it. I just got my courage and I said, "All right now, I done had a long day. I'm tired and I'm cranky. And if you think you're going to chase me twice in one night, well, you picked the wrong old woman." But the thing just kept gliding closer and closer. So I reached into Amos's pouch, grabbed that iron, and I flung it on the road with all the strength I had in my biscuit arm. And no sooner than the metal hit the ground, the tapping, well, it just stopped. And the haint just froze mid-glide with fog that was curling around it. And then, like smoke caught in a breeze, the haint shuddered and folded in on himself and just vanished. Just like that, it was gone. Pearl let out a relieved snort, and I patted her neck. "Easy, Pearl. Let's go home for something else besides to chase us." And child, I ain't ridden that road after dark on Halloween, not one time since that happened. But even today, folks who live around here still say that on a foggy Halloween night, you can still hear that pole dragging across the gravel. Granny Tollett gave me a quick wink and passed me a piece of homemade candy as she put another log on the fire. She had finished her story, but I had one final question for her. Granny, you mean to tell me you weren't scared at all?
No, child. Heavens no. I ain't scared of no ghost. I've raised 3 men, and one of them was your Papa Coy, and there ain't nothing on God's green earth more frightening than when that man's got gas.
You tell him, Granny. Stick around, folks. We got more stories from the dark side of Appalachia coming up. The first time I laid eyes on Lewisburg Manor was when I saw the for sale sign that piqued my curiosity, and the asking price seemed too good to be true. By all appearances, it looked just like an ordinary home in the heart of the charming town of Paintsville, nestled amidst the rolling hills of Kentucky. The manor's stately facade stood proudly, a symbol of the town's proud, rich history, far removed from the fast pace and the slick talkers of the outside world. Of course, years of neglect had taken their toll, but I liked the thought of getting my hands dirty, and I looked forward and invested in some sweat equity in this home. Little did I know that this elegant mansion would unravel a series of horrors reminiscent of a tale that was penned by Stephen King himself. Within a matter of weeks, the paperwork was complete, and I was the new owner of this historic home. The next few days were spent loading all my earthly belongings into the back of my 1969 Ford truck, and I moved into the house during a crisp autumn day in October. It turns out that the house had been vacant for years prior to my arrival, and before long, I began to take notice as the small town's residents whispered about its enigmatic past. Stories of unexplained apparitions, eerie occurrences, and the unsolved disappearance of its previous owner clung to the manor like a misty mountain fog. But I was too consumed by my own troubles, yearning for a fresh beginning, to pay heed to those tales. The first hint that something was amiss came during my second night in the house. I was still getting used to the old popping and creaking sounds during the night. Yet, I figured it was common for a house with 100-year-old bones. However, on this night, something else woke me from my sleep. I was roused by some faint whispers, some murmurs, like the secrets of the mountains being whispered into my ears. Initially, I dismissed them as echoes from the wind. But as the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew more defined and insistent. They seemed to emanate from within the very walls, as if the manor was harboring a well-guarded mystery. Each night, the whispers grew louder, evolving into chilling cries for help. And I began to have visions of a girl who was weeping, but I couldn't see her. Yet, I could feel her presence all around me. Heck, I began to believe I was losing my sanity until I met Old Man Johnson, a local who had lived in Lewisburg his entire life. He invited me over one evening, and as the night went on, our conversation turned to the unsettling history of Lewisburg Manor. Suddenly, his eyes were brimming with unease. With a voice trembling like the leaves in autumn, the old man spoke. "I tell you, that place is cursed," he murmured in a low voice. "My uncle lived there in 1924. He was the owner of a logging company over in Boone's Camp. He moved in with his wife and his 2 daughters. And one day, they all vanished without a trace. And when I say vanished, I tell you they vanished. There were no explanations. And since then, only whispers in the night." A shiver ran down my spine as I listened to the mountain man tell stories of the voices that folks have heard echoing through the house ever since. "Well, what do you mean you heard whispers in the night? What do you mean by that? Because I've heard them too," the old man laughed. "That house was built in the 1890s. and it was the residence of the prominent Montgomery family. You see, they own large tracts of land in Johnson County. But I tell you, there's a lot of secrets in these old hills. The same with the Montgomery family. Most folks knew very little of their private lives. And you see, they were known for their reclusive ways and some peculiar, strange rituals. The way I heard wagging tongues tell it, they dabbled in the occult. And they were able to summon dark forces and spirits from beyond. In 1898, the family disappeared without a trace. Everyone except the youngest daughter. And after the tragedy, they tried to adopt her out to a new home. But one night, she ran away, and she was last seen on the doorsteps of Lewisburg Manor. It seems she disappeared and was forever lost in the house. Now, the house itself, it changed ownership several times over the next couple decades, but no one could stay in it for long. And I tell you, there's something evil in that place. What do you mean, lost in the house? I asked. The old man paused. Well, let's just say she became another soul who will forever walk the night, roam in those halls. By now, it was midnight, and I set out on my way home. But I can't lie to you. Old Man Johnson's words echoed over and over in my mind. Yet, I'd never been one to believe in spirits and ghosts and haints. But it seems the old man's words had breathed life into the spirits that lived in that house. And nothing could prepare me for when I walked through the door. There she was, and her mouth twisted in internal anguish. It was almost as if she had had no soul, like it had been stolen from her. And all that was left was a walking corpse. Finally, I caught her at the bottom of the stairs. "Hello there, little girl. I'm here to help you. Don't be scared." I reached my hand for her. And in that moment, my voice joined the chorus of whispers forever trapped in the walls, an eternal symphony of despair who called Lewisburg Manor home.
To some, John Hendricks was just a crazy mountain man, and maybe even a witch. But to others, he was truly the Nostradamus of the Appalachian Mountains.
The Appalachian Mountains. For centuries, they've been home to legends and folklore, where mountain witches, prophets, and mystics have provided portals not only into our past, but our future. Indeed, mountain folks seem to have some connection with forces beyond this natural world, and a spiritual connection with the mountains themselves. And this supernatural connection has led some folks to predict some of the most ominous events in mankind's history and future. I'm a broken man. First, you take my daughter, and now you've taken my family. Why? Why have you forsaken me? God, I beg you, I am listening. Please, reveal your truth to me.
John Hendricks was a farmer who lived on the east end of Bear Creek Valley in East Tennessee. And although his daughter had died of diphtheria, John's wife blamed him because the father had spanked the child the day before she died. So his wife took the rest of the kids and moved to Arkansas. And John, well, he never saw him again. And this completely devastated him. And soon, John began withdrawing from society and began spending all of his time talking to God. Folks in the community thought he was losing his mind as John began questioning God about his purpose here on this earth and what the future held. One day, the Lord spoke to John and told him to go to the mountains and sleep on the ground for 40 nights and pray nonstop. And there,
the Lord promised to reveal a future to John. And although it was freezing cold, John obeyed the Lord, and he laid on the ground in the middle of the winter.
So I did it. I found me a place in the woods, and I laid and prayed for 40 nights. Sister Claire came and laid a blanket on me one night when it was so cold, and another night my hair froze to the ground. During this time, the Lord showed me many things. He showed me a railroad was coming through Elza, and even a tunnel through a mountain. No one had ever seen such a thing in these parts before. He showed me big factories over in Bear Creek Valley. He showed me thousands of people moving in here on the Black Oak Ridge doing construction and all kinds of things in those factories. This place would turn into a city and not just be a farm community anymore. He showed me many things being transported through the air. He showed me that a big war was coming, a big one. And what was going to happen here was going to win it. And I saw a huge explosion. People confused, loud noise, and the earth shaking.
When John returned from the wilderness, he was a different man. He would continue to have visions of the future, and he began warning anyone who would listen to him about what the future would bring. Many folks became afraid of John, and they accused him of being a witch. So the elders of the community converged on John's house, and they arrested him and imprisoned him in the county farm for insane people. However, John soon escaped and declared that God would burn the building to the ground within a month. And as he predicted, just a few short weeks later, the building was struck by lightning and burned to the ground. This event further convinced many in the community that John possessed supernatural powers and that he was indeed a witch. Between the years 1900 and 1904, John Hendricks remained isolated in the Appalachian Mountains, and he made some startling predictions about the future. And although he died in 1915, many of his predictions have become reality. John predicted that airplanes would carry cargo through the air, although the airplane itself hadn't been invented yet. John predicted the railroad and tunnels that would be drilled through mountains. He predicted the building of a top military secret city, and he predicted World War II and the atomic bomb.
John Prophet died before he ever saw any of his predictions come true in 1915. Now, in his day and time, Black Oak Ridge was nothing but a wilderness, and he lived all by himself. And the irony is today, it's literally a neighborhood where John's farm once stood. And here on this empty lot, there's John Hendricks laid to rest, Nostradamus of Appalachia and the prophet of Black Oak Ridge. What other predictions did he make that may come true?
Coming up, more true stories from the dark side of Appalachia.
Coming up next on the dark side of Appalachia, the true story of the abandoned Sewanee Amusement Park in West Virginia.
In the heart of West Virginia, nestled amidst the rolling hills, there lies a place where the veil between this world and the next is paper thin. It's called Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. But the mirth and the joy that it once held has long since faded into the shadowy annals of history. What happened here was so disturbing that most folks refuse to talk about it anymore, hoping that one day it'll be forgotten. And perhaps the curse surrounding this land will die with it. You see, the park's dark origins stretch back to the 1770s, where a family's decision to settle upon the sacred burial grounds of the Shawnee Indians would set in motion a legacy of terror that has lasted for hundreds of years. The twisted saga of Lake Shawnee began when the first white settlers, the Clay family, arrived in the late 1700s,
oblivious to the dark history of the land. They built their homestead atop the Shawnee burial grounds, the Earth's sacred embrace desecrated. In revenge for this violation, the Shawnee Indians emerged one fateful day and brutally murdered 2 of their children as they played by the lake, and they stole a 3rd child. Desperate to find his child, Mr. Clay tracked the tribe all the way into Ohio, where he found his son Ezekiel, who had been sacrificed and burned at the stake. The father returned home with his boy's remains back to West Virginia, where, in a desperate act of atonement, the Clay family buried their young ones at the very place they perished, sealing a curse that would echo through time. And by the 1920s, most folks had long forgot about the dark past of Lake Shawnee, when an investor purchased the ancient burial grounds and turned it into an amusement park. You see, the park was a haven for local coal mining families looking for summer joy and recreation. They were completely unaware that the soil was forever tainted. On the outside, it appeared as a bright and cheerful facade, but in reality, it only masked the sinister secrets that laid beneath the surface. Suddenly, unexplained tragedies began to grip Lake Shawnee when several deaths shocked the local townsfolk. Inexplicably, a young girl died on the swing ride as her seat unhinged itself, sending the poor soul spiraling into the abyss. Another young boy lost his life when he drowned in the swimming pool after his arm got stuck in a drain pipe. Yet, witnesses say that they saw something dragging the innocent soul into the cold, watery depths. It seemed like the park's machinery took on a life of its own, turning merry-go-rounds into nightmares and roller coasters into instruments of doom. The desolation grew as parents watched helplessly, their tears mingling with the eerie silence that hung in the air. By the 1980s, Lake Shawnee Amusement Park finally closed its gates, the land, scarred by centuries of misery and horrors of the innocent, breathed a sigh of relief, or so it seemed. Today, visitors brave enough to trespass upon this cursed land have borne witness to echoes of the past, the shadows of the Shawnee Indians, their eyes burning with ancient anger, can be glimpsed in the flicker of a campfire, the mournful wails of the Clay children trapped in their watery grave, pierced through the night's stillness. And as the moon cast its spectral glow upon the abandoned rides, the laughter of the lost children seemed to rise from their rustling, skeletal frames. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park remains a twilight realm where the ancient wrongs and the youthful tragedies intertwine in an eternal dance of sorrow. Its grim history serves as a stark reminder that some places carry a darkness too profound to ever be forgotten, and the spirits trapped within are bound to seek retribution until the end of time.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 5 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
The first time I saw him was back in 1925. I was 12 years old, and Pap had sent me up on the ridge past the new ground out yonder to fetch the mules. It was dark, but the harvest moon had just risen over Stone Mountain, so it lit up my path up the ridge. But the way was steep as a cow's face anyhow. I topped the hill and I heard something moving in the bushes up ahead. thought it was one of the mules stirring around up there, so I didn't think too much about it. All of a sudden, I heard footsteps. Coming around the hill on one of the old cow paths. Now, you see, nobody was supposed to be up there on the ridge messing around that time of night. So I jumped in the bush and I hid from whoever was coming. I sure didn't want to meet a mule thief up there all by myself. The steps were getting closer and closer, and I was laying on the leaves with my belly hugging the ground for dear life. I was flatter than a run-over hat. There in the moonlight, a tall man dressed in dark and tattered clothes came into view. He had dirt and leaves all over him like he had come up out of the ground. And as he came close to me, I looked up at him and I was trying to see his face, but he didn't have one. Hell, he didn't even have a head, just a bloody stump. My hair stood up on my head and I was plumb scared to death. He was standing there about a foot away from me when suddenly he turned around and headed down the hill towards the old Smith graveyard. I swear he walked into that big oak tree down there and just disappeared. I took off right down that hill and I ran through a briar patch. I didn't sleep a wink for a dad-blame week.
Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller, and I hope you're enjoying the story. I wanted to pop in for a moment to let you know that I'm going to be giving away an Appalachian Storyteller t-shirt like this as a thank you for watching this video. All you have to do to enter is just write down in the comments below where you're watching this video from. And next week, I'll pick a winner and I'll send you a shirt just like this in your choice, a black or gray, as a thank you for supporting this channel.
A whole year went by when I finally got over seeing that headless man. Well, sir, I was up in a barn one night milking, and I heard them footsteps approaching the barn. I looked out there and I saw him coming through the field. When he got almost to the barn, he turned suddenly and he crossed the creek and disappeared near an old Indian salt lick. I told my family about seeing the headless man, and they all looked at me like I was crazy. Then one night in early October, while we were all sitting on the porch like we are now, I heard him coming down the hill behind the house. He walked down the side yonder, and he walked past us on the front porch. Pap turned white as a sheet, and Aunt Belle Ash exclaimed, "Lord have mercy, that dead-burned devil don't have a head." We watched him walk through the yard and on up the road towards the Davis's farm and disappear into the night. Now, other people in the community commenced to seeing this headless man. Smokey Lawson was walking home from Guy Hurd's store one night, and he'd walked beside him all the way home. Kate Helton lived up in Helton Hollow near Spryer's Chapel Church. One morning before daylight, she saw the headless man walk out of the woods and down the road. Then, we didn't see him for a long time until one night in 1965. I was coming home from Fred Mallory's, and he fell in right beside me walking. Just as we neared Sulphur Springs Valley, the headless man turned and walked up the hill and disappeared into the Shepherd graveyard. That was the last time I ever saw him. Papa always told me, if you ask a spook, what in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are you doing here? It has to tell you. But I never did ask it anything. I figured, how was it going to tell me? He didn't even have a head. But I always wondered where he came from and who he was in his other life. Now, Charlie told stories of the headless man up until the day he died. He and others who saw the headless specter always claimed it was true. And this story has ties to historical facts. The old salt lick mentioned in Charlie's story was an ancient Indian hunting ground. Charlie's house was located on the old Smith's homestead. And you see, In 1863, during the throes of the Civil War, Henry Smith was kidnapped by bushwhackers in front of his family, and he was never seen again. His wife is buried up in the Smith Cemetery. In the late 1800s, Henry's son, George, found a human skeleton while digging out a spring branch, but the head was never located. Brooks Chapel was made as a makeshift hospital during the Civil War for Confederate soldiers. Now, the building was torn down in the early part of the 20th century, and the material was used to build Charlie's house. Even today, a visit to Sulphur Springs Valley is beautiful this time of the year, but if you come at night, be on the lookout for the tall, headless stranger. He may still walk these dark and lonely hills.
Coming up next on the dark side of Appalachia, look out below, it's the Watchman.
I'd been staying at the inn in Charleston, West Virginia for the past 2 days, waiting for a business partner to arrive from Pennsylvania. It was a cool evening, just about dusk, and I decided to go for a walk after supper to provide a much-needed break from my boredom. Within about a half mile, I came upon a high rock bluff overlooking the railroad that had been cut through the mountainside about 100 feet below. There, I saw a lone railman busy at work.
"Hello! Below there! Look out! Hello!"
The rail worker was standing at the door of his box with a flag in his hand, furled around a short pole. One would have thought that surely he couldn't have doubted from what direction my voice came, but instead of looking up to where I stood at the top of the steep rocks, nearly directly over his head, he turned himself about and looked up and down the rail line. To me, there was something remarkable about his manner of doing so, but I couldn't for the life of me say what it was. But I do know it was enough to attract my notice. Again I called out,
"Hello! You there! Below!"
In that moment, he turned himself again and raised his eyes and saw my figure standing high above him.
"Is there any way I can come down and speak to you?"
He looked up at me without replying, and I looked down at him without pressing him too soon with a repetition of my idle question. Just then, there came a rumbling vibration in the earth, quickly changing into a violent pulsation and the oncoming rush that caused me to step back as though it had the force to draw me down. Within a moment, a train came rumbling through the tunnel and made its way through the deep, narrow gorge and was skimming away over the landscape. I looked down again, and I saw him refurling the flag that he had shown as the train went by. I repeated my inquiry, and after a pause, during which he looked at me with fixed attention, he motioned with his rolled-up flag towards a point on my level, some 200 or 300 yards in the distance, and I set out for that point. There, I found a rough, zigzag descending path that was notched out and led below, which I followed. The cutting was extremely deep and unusually wet. When I came down low enough on the descent, I finally saw him again, and I saw that he was standing between the rails on the train track, as if he was waiting for me to appear. Once I stepped out near the level of the railroad, I drew nearer to him, and I saw that he was a dark, lean man with a silver beard and rather heavy eyebrows. His work post was in a solitary and dismal place as I'd ever saw. On both sides, a dripping wet wall of jagged stone blocked out all of the view except for a tiny strip of the sky. The perspective one way was only a crooked prolongation of this great dungeon, and the shorter perspective in the other direction terminated at a gloomy red light and the gloomier entrance to a black tunnel whose massive architecture was barbarous, depressing, and full of foreboding air. So little sunlight ever found its way to this spot that it had an earthly, deadly smell, and so much cold wind rushed through it that it struck chill in me, as if I'd left the natural world. Before he stirred, I was near enough to him to have touched him, but he never removed his eyes from mine. He stepped back one step, and he lifted his hand with a most curious look towards the red light near the tunnel's mouth. He looked all about it, as if something were missing from it. Then he looked at me curiously.
"Are you all right? Is everything okay?"
I said while forcing a smile. "Well, I was just trying to figure out if I'd seen you before. And that's all," he said in a low voice. He returned his gaze to the red light. Looking around, it seemed all he had to do here was change the signal light to guide the trains and to turn the iron handle every now and then, changing the direction of both the tracks and the incoming trains. He took me inside his small office beside the tracks, where there was a fire, a desk for an official book, which he had to make certain entries, a telegraphic instrument with its dial. We huddled around the fire and engaged in some small conversation. His grave, dark eyes seemed divided between me and the fire, and he seemed to throw in the word "sir" from time to time. Several times he was interrupted by a little ringing bell, and he had to read off messages and send replies. Once he had to stand outside the door and wave a flag as a train passed and make some verbal communication with the driver. In the discharge of his duties, I observed him to be remarkably exact and vigilant. Yet, strangely, twice he broke off our conversation and turned his face to the little bell. Even though it wasn't ringing, he'd open the door of the hut and look out towards the red light near the mouth of the tunnel. On both of these occasions, he came back to the fire without saying a word, but he had an inexplicable air about him. Having warmed up a spell, I decided to leave the railman to his work.
"I appreciate the work you're doing here. You're doing a mighty fine job. You seem to be pretty content, too,"
I said as I prepared to depart. "Well, I used to be," he replied in a low voice. "But I'm troubled now, sir. Yeah, I'm troubled."
"With what? What's your trouble?"
"Now, it's very difficult to speak of, but if you ever make it back out this way, I'll try to tell you." His response sparked my curiosity, and I promised to pay him another visit on the next evening. The signalman nodded and followed me out the door. "I'll flash my white light for you, sir," he said in his peculiar low voice, "till you found your way up. But listen, when you get to the top, don't call out. For that matter, when you come down tomorrow night, don't call out to me." I was a bit baffled by this request, and even more by the way he was examining my face, as if he was looking for some sort of understanding. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking you a departing question, what made you yell out, 'Hello, below there, look out,' when you first arrived here?"
"Heavens knows. I was just trying to be friendly and get your attention, that's all."
"You sure there wasn't some other reason?"
"Well, what other reason could I possibly have?"
"Well, are you sure your words weren't conveyed to you in some supernatural way?"
"Goodness no, my friend. What would make you think such a thing?"
He spoke no other words. His dark eyes just stared a hole right through me before slowly walking back to his little signal house.
What on earth did that mean?
I thought to myself. The next night, I was right on time as I set out towards the rail, and after a brisk walk, I placed my foot on the first notch of the zigzag, rocky trail leading down to the tracks. In the distance, I could hear the faint sounds of the clock, striking 11 p.m. from the inn. To my surprise, the railman was waiting for me at the bottom.
"Well, I didn't yell this time, my friend,"
I said with a smile as we came together. He cautiously looked up and down the rail line and quietly nodded his head for me to follow him to his box. And as soon as we entered, he closed the door and we sat down by the fire. "I've made up my mind, sir, that you shall not have to ask me twice what troubles me," he began, bending forward as soon as we were seated and speaking in a tone a little above a whisper. "The truth is, I took you for someone else yesterday evening, and that troubles me."
"Well, who did you think I was?"
"No, I can't say for sure. I never saw his face. His left arm is always across his face, and his right arm is waving violently," the signalman said as he motioned his arm up and down. I followed his action with my eyes. The first time I saw him, it was on a moonlit night. I was sitting here when I heard a voice cry, "Hello, below there, look out." I jumped right up, and I looked out from that door, and I saw this someone else standing by the red light near the tunnel, waving his arms, just as I showed you. His voice seemed hoarse from shouting, and he cried, "Look out, below there, look out." I picked up my lamp, and I turned it on red, and I ran towards the figure calling, "What's wrong? What's happened to you?" Yet, the stranger just stood there, outside the blackness of the tunnel, with his hand covering his face. I moved quickly, and within an instant, I was right near the man. I reached my hand out to remove his sleeve from in front of his face, but he suddenly disappeared. I ran into the tunnel, looking for him, almost 500 yards. Before I stopped, I held my lamp above my head, and I saw wet stains running down the walls and trickling through the arch, and it seemed like I heard a faint, phantom train whistle. All at once, I got spooked, and I tell you, I ran out of there a lot faster than I went in. It was a ghost, I tell you. And 6 hours after I saw it, the most famous accident on this line happened. A terrible accident. All the dead were brought to the spot, right where the ghost had stood. A cold chill swept over me as I listened to the railman, but I did my best to fight against it, and I tried hard to convince him that it was simply a coincidence. And all of a sudden, he interrupted me. "Well, sir, I'm not finished." 6 or 7 months passed, when one morning, just as the day was breaking, I was standing at the door, looking towards the red light, and I saw the mysterious ghost again. He stood there facing me, with his arm over his face, almost as a warning, I tell you. But it was as real as I'm standing in front of you now. All of a sudden, my bell began ringing, and before I could answer it, a train came roaring out of the tunnel at full speed. I noticed a carriage window on my side, what looked like confusion of heads and hands. I saw it just in time to signal the driver, and I changed the light to red. The engineer put his brake on, but the train had drifted past here, 150 yards or so, and as I ran after it, I ran along the side, and I heard terrible screams and cries. A beautiful woman had died in one of the train compartments, and she was brought right here and laid down on this floor between us, her body laid right where your feet are, under a tarp. Involuntarily, I pushed my chair back, and I looked down at the boards at which he pointed. It's true, sir. I tell you, precisely as it happened. Now, sir, this is why my mind is troubled. The ghost came back a week ago, and ever since, I can feel it watching me. I can't get no peace or rest for it. It calls to me, over and over. Below there, look out, look out. It stands waving to me, and it rings my bell. Suddenly, my mind went back to yesterday, when the railman kept staring at his bell during our conversation. Just then, he leaned forward and continued. So you see, by this time you should fully understand, sir. What troubles me so dreadfully is the question I can't answer. What does the ghost mean? What is he saying to me? What is it warning against? What is the danger? I reckon you best be on your way now. Come tomorrow and you'll understand. But whatever you do, don't come yelling. The next evening was absolutely lovely, and I walked out early to enjoy it. The sun was not quite yet down, and I walked briskly on the path near the top of the deep cutting. I was eager for one last conversation with the signalman. Once arriving, I looked down towards the track. I can't describe to you the thrill that seized upon me when close to the mouth of the tunnel, I saw the appearance of a man with the sleeve of his left arm across his eyes, passionately waving his right arm. For a moment, I thought I saw the ghost, but I quickly realized that near the signal office, there were a set of wooden poles with a makeshift gurney covered with a tarp that several men were standing over. With an irresistible sense that something was wrong, I descended down the notched path with all the speed I could make. "What's the matter?" I asked the men. "Well, sir, the signalman was killed this morning. Not the man that belonged to that box. Not the man that I know." "Yes, sir. Well, you'll recognize him, sir, if you knew him. His face is still quite composed," said the man as he spoke for the others. He solemnly raised one end of the tarp, exposing the deceased railman's head. "Well, how did this happen?" I asked. Well, he was cut down by an engine, sir. There ain't nary a man in West Virginia who knew his work better. But for some reason, he wasn't clear of the outer rail. And it was in broad daylight, too. He had his lamp in his hand, and as the engine came out of the tunnel, his back was towards her, and she cut him down. This fella here is the engineer of the train. He can tell you exactly what happened. The engineer, who wore a rough, dark dress, stepped back to his former place at the mouth of the tunnel. I was coming around the curve of the tunnel, sir, and I saw him at the end, but there was no time to slow my speed, and he didn't seem to take heed of the whistle. I shut it off when we were closing in on him, and I called out to him as loud as I could. "Hello! Below there! Look out! Look out! For God's sake!" But it was too late. I put my left arm over my eyes so I wouldn't see, and I waved my right arm to the very last minute, but it was no use.
Coming up next on the dark side of Appalachia, the true story of Pressman's home in Hawkins County, Tennessee.
Nestled deep within the shadowy woods, its existence was all but forgotten by outsiders and most townsfolk, except for a handful of stories that was passed down through the generations. You see, for the town of Pressman's home, it was much like a tattered page, torn from the darkest chapters of Appalachia, cursed by a darkness that couldn't be erased. Today, it's all but deserted, except for a few folks that remain. Oh, and they don't take kindly to outsiders nosing around. No trespassing signs aside, I wandered into the overgrown path that led to Pressman's home. The sky above grew heavy and ominous, as if the very heavens themselves warned against my intrusion. The trees, bent and gnarled, whispered secrets that no living soul should ever hear. Yet I felt an irresistible pull, like a moth being drawn to an infernal flame. The air grew chilly and dense. Every step I took weighed on me, as if the very ground itself resisted my presence. The first building I encountered was an old chapel. Its stained glass windows were shattered, with the roof caving in and the pews coated in dust. I could almost hear the ghostly choir singing hymns that had long been forgotten. I dared not step on the floor for fear of falling through. Nature was fully consuming this church, and I could feel a dark presence throughout it. As I ventured further, I stumbled upon a decaying schoolhouse. The chalkboard was still covered in a cacophony of lessons, as if the spirits of the long-departed children still yearned for knowledge. The laughter and the footsteps of the schoolyard's past seemed to echo in the emptiness, creating a chilling atmosphere. I caught my breath as I reached the center of town, where an old industrial building stood. Its windows were shattered, and its walls covered with ivy. It was said that once upon a time, this place had been a school for pressmen from around the world to learn their craft. That is, before the plague swept through the town. But now, the spirits of these men lingered on, haunting in the faded hallways. Their whispers filled the air, and their footsteps echoed through the dusty corridors. And their pale faces could be seen in the shattered mirrors. I couldn't escape the sensation that I was being watched, that the residents of this ghost town were aware of my intrusion. Every creaking floorboard and rustling leaf seemed to harbor some unknown presence, an unseen force that drew closer with every step I took. At the heart of the town, there was an old, overgrown cemetery that beckoned to me. The gravestones were worn and weathered, and their inscriptions were barely legible. As I passed through, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits beneath the earth were whispering their tales Stories of lives cut short and tragedies left unspoken. In the distance, I heard the mournful howl of a lone coyote. A haunting reminder of the town's isolation. I paused for a moment with my heart racing, and suddenly a figure emerged from the misty graveyard. A shadowy specter with hollow eyes and a voice that croaked like a raven. It beckoned me closer, and I dared not resist. The apparition began to speak of a curse that had befallen Pressman's home, a darkness born of a terrible secret buried beneath the town, an inescapable darkness that swallowed their very souls. It warned me that I too would be trapped in this forsaken place, my fate forever entwined with the tortured souls of Pressman's home. As I stumbled away from this ghost town, I could feel the oppressive presence of Pressman's home clinging to me. The whispers of the departed echoed in my ears, and I knew that the stories of this cursed place would never truly be forgotten, because it was a nightmare etched into the very soul of Hawkins County, a place where the past can never rest, and the darkness will never fade. The Riggs house in Hamlin County, Tennessee. A 200-year-old relic that's barely still standing. As I filmed this abandoned house, I discovered a homeless person living in one of the rooms for several days. I asked him if the house was haunted, and he replied, "These are my people. We're all just ghosts here." For days, I couldn't get that statement out of my head. Such an oddly poetic thing to say. A man named Gillespie Riggs built his home in 1822. And during the first years of this home, Mr. Riggs raised a family here, while his 10 slaves worked the land and ran a moonshine still for him. When Mr. Riggs died, the home entered another chapter of its history. You see, his son, Russell, was the postmaster of Morristown, and he turned this house into a tavern and an overnight stop for folks traveling the area by stagecoach. He also marketed the sulfur springs as miracle waters that still run behind the house today. Indeed, folks came from all over America to visit this home. Now, this all came to an end when the Civil War broke out. The house was turned into a hospital for both Confederate and Union soldiers. Many men died here. It's said that one man bled out on the top of the stairs so bad that the floor is still stained with his blood. Now, After the Civil War, his home was turned into a grocery store and then a general store. Several times it was turned back into a home and then into a funeral home. The last families to live here were in the 1980s. Now, this home stands alone, slowly being reclaimed by nature. As I stood in this house, I listened carefully as the wind blew through the broken windows. I could feel the spirits from the past. I imagined 200 years of people walking these floors. Wealthy travelers from long ago, eating fine meals and drinking the famous sulfur spring water, while the slaves worked in the kitchen. I heard the joys of babies being born here. There were also the screams of the Civil War soldiers being operated on, echoing through the hallways, and the mourning of countless families who gathered here for funerals of their loved ones. Indeed, we're all just ghosts here.